Yes, I was caught dancing again. Yeah, Sham, you're on mute. You know what? I still love this music. It's been more than 7 months. And you know what? On August the 10th, during our learning festival, right, in KL, you must play this and you must dance to it.
Okay, no, you
And
I'll play it and I'll just do what I do backstage. I just look at you dancing and smile at it. So welcome
sure.
everyone. Hi.
Welcome everyone to Leadership in Flow Asia. It's July, and we're talking about resolute leaders. And for all our fans who have logged in, or viewers who are watching us today, what is Leadership in Flow Asia about? This is a show where we talk to leaders every week to understand what drives them at a personal level, at a leadership level, and how they drive their business growth. Right. And today, Sham, who do we have?
And today, our quiet leader comes all the way from Western Australia, Perth, for close to 40 years, 4 decades. Our quiet leader, our guest today, Dr. Shaun Ridley, has been helming the Australian Institute of Management, the Western Australian
Nice.
branch or chapter, right? And I met him I had the pleasure of meeting him 2 months ago in Perth when we had a network meeting. And I was very taken by Shaun. Very quiet, very inward looking, yet at the same time very measured about what he says. Man with a lot of experience, yet very gentle, and I think also man of depth, right? So we're going to have a nice chat with him because he's got his angle that he gave us for this week's show was to challenge assumptions. So we're going to bring
Challenge
Shaun.
assumptions. That's right.
Yeah, right. And before we bring Shaun up, just on a personal note, he's an amateur photographer.
Oh,
Proud dad of 2 daughters and granddad of 3 grandchildren. So that's where he's spending his time when he's not at work. He shared that with us at our meeting last week, if you remember. Okay. So I'm going to bring Shaun up. And of course, we now know that he also likes F1 because he's been chatting to you about F1, or you've been chatting with him.
Yes,
Okay.
let's bring him on.
All right, here we go. Hi, Dr. Shaun Ridley.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Ashok.
How are you, sir?
I'm a bit nervous now after that introduction, but I'm very pleased to be here and very glad to be part of the show.
And we are very, very happy that you said yes to us.
Thank you.
All right. So aside from the fact that we know that you love or you're getting to enjoy F1 a lot more than what you thought you would be, I'm going to get us into that realm of leadership and get the first question rolling, right?
Fantastic. Thank you.
So you've got close to 4 decades of working with leadership thinkers. So on one side, leadership thinkers, those from the schools of business schools, executive education, and on the other hand, with practitioners, all right, from C-suite right down to new managers, and also leading a team internally with the Australian Institute of Management, right?
That's correct.
What recurring patterns have you noticed about leaders or leadership?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and a question I get asked a lot about what things have I noticed have changed over my time, over the last 40 years or so. And my first response to that question is always not as much as you think. Like, it's very trendy for people to go, oh, the world's been turned upside down. It must be unimaginable now compared to what it was when I first started off. And in some respects, that's true. Certainly, we have artificial intelligence now, whereas before we had manual typewriters. So, you know, the technological changes have been transformational. But I still think where leaders get tripped up is the same thing it was 30 or 40 years ago, which is people and relationships with people. So although we might think that the aspects of human behavior and leadership have changed dramatically in parallel to technology, I'm not so sure. I think many of the same things that test leaders today tested leaders 20 or 30 or 40 years ago.
So if I were to dig a little bit deeper on that, right? So what is it that you're saying are the same things? What are you hearing or seeing that's telling you that, you know, I mean, there are nuances of change, but generally things are about the same, right? I mean, that's what I'm getting from you.
Yes, and there's some simple examples of things like we used to run a program many years ago called Having Difficult Conversations. In 2023, it's still one of our most popular courses because that challenge of a leader to talk to a member of their team about a difficult performance challenge or a difficult performance topic is as hard today as it ever was. And so examples like that where leaders find themselves having to, you know, relate to a staff member, give them some difficult feedback, handle a complex interpersonal challenge. I think that's the same. I think that's the same as it ever was. Certainly the pace of change has sped up, and so we need to do things a lot quicker. That's certainly changed. And I heard a great quote not long ago that said that the pace of change is faster than it's ever been before, and right now it's slower than it will ever be again. So it's this notion of it's really quick now, but this is as slow as it's ever going to get. So it's just going to get faster now. So certainly we've had to adapt in that sense. But there are some of these little things because we're human. We're human beings trying to work with other human beings and make things happen. And I think those things are just as challenging now as they ever were. We haven't solved that one and ticked that box and said we can move on from that yet.
Move on that, yeah. So if those are the patterns that the pattern that you've seen is that nothing has changed significantly, right?
In those interpersonal things, those relationship things, those people things, yes. Other parts of our life have been transformational. Those, as I say, the pace of change, the advent of technology, some of the sort of structural things in the way organisations set themselves up. And by that I mean many years ago, a manager or a leader's job was to manage or lead. Nowadays, they have a set of performance indicators themselves as well as having to lead. So a good example of that would be the sales manager. 30 years ago, the sales manager would have a team of sales reps, and each of the sales reps would have a budget, and the manager would work with each of them to help them achieve their goals, their targets. Nowadays, the sales manager has a target themselves in addition to each of the sales reps having a target. So this manager has a kind of a day job as well as their managing job. And that's put lots of extra pressure on those of us in management and leadership roles in organisations. I think that's a structural change that's happened. And I think that one's not going away either. I don't think we're ever going to flip back to managers just being able to spend time coaching and supporting their team without having to do some tasks, some roles themselves.
So that's going to put another layer of load on leaders, and things that they have to manage, right? And the expectations that leaders have, or direct reports or teams have about their leaders and what they expect leaders to be able to do. It's almost as if the leader has this magic wand that he's supposed to, wave around and manage this and like do the day job and also manage the stuff that they
and also in some ways explains why it's certainly in Western Australia many organizations are having difficulty getting people to step up into leadership roles.
I was going to ask that. Yeah,
because they're sort of saying, well, look, the extra money I might get or extra recognition I might get for being a leader is not worth it. It's only a few dollars or a few $1,000s. It's not worth the extra pain and stress and load, and it's just not worth it. So look, I'll take a little bit less, and I'll go home when it's knock off time, and I won't worry about it all night. I'll just go home. So we're having some interesting kind of conversations with organizations who are really saying, we've got lots of vacancies and nobody internally wants them.
Yep. And oh my God, that gives an interesting twist to clogging up the leadership pipeline, doesn't it? I mean, you talk about, it used to be in the day where people didn't, held on to the role until someone said, you had to give you a kick and move you out in order for the next level to go up. But now in having people, enough people to go into that pipeline and push up through the pipeline. Right.
Yeah.
Hey,
well, one of the people I was chatting to was somebody who runs a large hospital here in Perth. And in large hospitals, that the director of medicine gets paid less than the surgeons. Why would you be the director of medicine? It's an incredibly demanding job. It's massively complex. It's incredibly stressful. It's you're never not at work. You always have to be available and on call. And the people that report to you, the surgeons, get paid more than you do, and they go home at the end of their theatre round. And so, there's, unless you want to be an administrator and you want to make a contribution to the health system, you're certainly not doing it for the money. And it's going to take a pretty significant toll on your health to do it.
So I think we're at that space where it just naturally brings us to the next question I have in mind, actually. And that's, given this scenario and also some of the things that we talked about when we met in the pre-show chat, what are those organizational assumptions or myths that you challenge, given what you're seeing on the ground? What are the things that you'd say, I want to challenge this, and that's been a little bit of how you think about your leadership and how you approach it.
Yeah, this is a bit of a hobby horse of mine, in the sense that one of my pet hates is the sort of consultant speak, because it's very easy to get the sort of glib phrase. And so one of my favorites is when I hear people talk about culture, and they say, the culture in our organization is terrible, and this is impacting on culture, and that is impacting on culture. Or the reverse, the culture in our organization is fantastic. And I often challenge those sort of phrases, because I don't think culture is a thing. And I think I used the expression when I spoke to you last time that there's a famous Australian rules football coach here in Australia, on the Eastern Seaboard, who said that culture is the thing you blame when you don't really know what's going on. So it's where we go when we can't explain what's happening. It's the culture that's terrible. Now, the way to get around that, of course, is to say, no, tell me the behaviours that you think are wrong. and bring it back to a behavioral dimension. And if you can do that and get talking about behavior, then you stop the superficial conversation about culture, because saying the culture is bad is not helpful to anybody. It just doesn't take you anywhere. Whereas if somebody says those behaviors that Shaun uses when he talks over other people in meetings are causing a disharmony in the group, and you go, okay, I can fix that. I can do something about that. My supervisor can have a conversation with me about that, or if I'm given that feedback, I can adjust my behavior. Now, that will improve the culture, because it's very specific around behaviors that can be changed or fixed. So that's one example of one of those myths or assumptions. The other one, which is kind of really common again here in Australia, is people talking about they want to think outside the box. They want to think outside the box all the time. Now, my provocation is the organisations that I've seen and worked with over the years, the vast majority of them would be much better off thinking inside the box. Fixing up the things that they do in their organisation and making sure they address those things inside the organisation, rather than look for a magic silver bullet out there that's going to give them a massive boost in revenue or cut costs dramatically, whatever. As if there's this magic formula floating around out there that nobody has seen yet, and if we think outside the box, we'll discover it. I've seen little or no evidence that that's true. It's also a little annoying because the original expression about thinking outside the box wasn't a box at all. It was a little sort of problem-solving exercise with 9 dots. So there was 9 dots, and you had to connect the 9 dots by using 4 lines and not lifting your pen off the paper. So, and the way you solve that is to have one of the lines go beyond the dots and come back again. And that's where the expression go outside the lines or outside the box came from. So it's not even a box. So the myth is particularly frustrating in that regard.
Yes, go ahead. Shaun,
thank you very much for that, Dr. Shaun. Okay, so I'm going to start with your box first, and then because I'm going to go back to where you started.
Okay.
Right. So what I'm hearing is, yes, people use words or language very quickly, very easily, without having thought through very carefully what it actually means. Right. That's what I'm hearing when you say
yes.
You know,
and I don't want to be unkind that way. I don't want to be kind of dismissive of that. In some ways, it's because we don't have other language to use to describe it. And in some ways, it gets us off the hook a bit.
Okay. I do have a differing opinion at this point of time. I know you're being kind. You said you can understand why they use the language, right? I think in this world where we have AI now, generative language, AI, and all the information that comes up from that, I think there's another skill that we need to pick up is to be discerning. I think we need to start asking those hard questions. We need to start questioning a lot of these assumptions along the way.
Yes.
Right. So I know you're being kind. Right, but I just feel that we still need to question a little bit more just to get to the context of it. Because, for example, when you mentioned earlier, you said if there's one thing that has not changed, relationship matters.
Yes, absolutely.
And when I think about the Agile manifesto, right? In the Agile manifesto, there are 4 values and 12 principles. Right? I'll just talk about the first value. The first value says very clearly, individuals and interaction over processes and tools.
Yes.
Now, processes and tools are still important. We're not saying it's not important, but they're saying, hey, you know what is important? Individual and the interaction, which boils back to, and this manifesto was actually written by software people.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
right?
Yep.
So what they are banging home is the fact that relationships matter,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
And you brought something up. You said for the longest time you've been holding this difficult conversations. You're trying to help people have difficult conversations, whether it's around performance or relationship expectations and all that. But even today, it is still important,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And so if you now diagnose that, right, why do you think people have that difficulty in holding those conversations?
I think they're difficult for a reason. First of all, so it's not like we. But they're difficult because we care. We care about the outcome. If we didn't care about the outcome, it wouldn't be difficult. We would just go in there. We would push our way through. We would dismiss the other person quickly, and we would just move on and get on with our life. And we'd be very blasé about it. It wouldn't be difficult at all. But they're difficult because we care. And we care because we're human, and because there's consequence, and because there's relationships that matter to us. And we, by and large, like to be liked. So for a whole raft of reasons like that, I think that they are difficult. They should be difficult. They should be hard. And we just need to get better at navigating them before, during, and after. So I'm not suggesting that we should get to a point where we're so good at it that they don't become difficult. I think that they should always be difficult because we care. We care about the outcome and the other person.
I think that's a very good part, a starting point, because you care about the outcome that stems from your intentions of holding those conversations.
Yes.
In my experience, because when you talked about difficult conversation, it like struck a lot of chord in me, because yes, I have had those experiences of not only having difficult conversations, but also imparting that knowledge.
Yes.
And I've always been very curious about why is it so difficult, even for myself, even having that knowledge, the tools around it. And it took me many years to finally understand. And I think I'm in that search. And that's probably because I also questioned a lot of assumptions like you did. The tools are the easy part, is rational,
Yes.
logic. What I realize is this: it's the emotions I feel, right? Whether it's my intentions, the outcomes, that part I did not arrest well. And I think it's a combination of both, how we understand ourselves and how we actually hold those conversations, right? Which links back to another, the third question I have now, right?
Yes.
Is taking a look at how we can diagnose the current situation, right? What are some of the lessons leaders can take, or from this COVID disruption, right? What are some of the lessons leaders are missing from this COVID disruption? Again, if we go deeper and diagnose and be totally honest with ourselves.
Yes. Yeah. For me at least, there's two really interesting things that have come out of COVID. One is how quickly we've gone back to doing things the way we've always done them. That's one, which I find fascinating, because at the start of COVID, there was very bold predictions about, we'll never go back to the office again. We'll never shake hands again. We'll never hug another human being again. This is, the world is going to be turned upside down forever, but that hasn't happened. We're all back to shaking hands and hugging everybody and so on. The other thing that I think is really interesting is that our attitude towards change has changed. So COVID has meant that nothing is unimaginable anymore. So we used to do a lot of sort of scenario planning with organizations, and you'd paint these pictures of slightly extreme positions, and the organization would would think through how they might manage those extreme positions. COVID now has said, well, those extreme positions are just ridiculously conservative now, because nobody would have predicted that the world would shut down for months and that we would have this catastrophic situation that we've had. So, most people are familiar with the sort of John Cotter model of 8 steps of change and so on. Those, we sort of leap over about the first 5 steps now. We kind of don't need those things, because we've taught ourselves that we can change very, very quickly if we have to. If the incentive is there, if the urgency is there, if the drive is there, all of a sudden we don't have an excuse anymore to say, oh, well, the change is going to be very slow. Well, why? Well, why will it be very slow? We've just demonstrated, the whole world has demonstrated recently in the last 2 or 3 years, that we can change incredibly quickly if we want to. I think that's an interesting lesson for us, and how we might hang on to that as we go into the next period of our lives will be interesting.
Right. Thank you for that, because you're right to say that the attitude towards change has changed.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just wondering whether leaders have really looked into this 2-year period or 3-year period and said, what is different about this change?
Mm-hmm.
For example, yes, in early 2020, I even had a conversation with an organization in January. We were talking about the BCP plans when we first heard about the Wuhan virus at that point of time. And they say, yeah, we have our BCP plans, but that's based on SARS, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But today that BCP plans is not relevant anymore, because you said we have got to look at the extremes and we can't imagine what that is.
Yes.
But there has been, in my observation, right, having conversations around this region, I find that there's one thing that has changed, that has become totally new, which is about the mental wellness of people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that is a total new challenge even for leaders. How do you see that working out?
That has been a very significant issue in this part of the world. The expression that's been used most frequently is a tsunami of mental health issues. It is just a massive wave of mental health challenges. That has forced a major sort of rethink in organisations about psychological well-being. Is now on a par in our legislation as well as our practice with physical well-being. The identification of psychosocial hazards and risks in the workplace and the implications of that. And it's certainly in Australia, where the unemployment rate is extremely low, the balance of power has swung towards the employee, so much so that the demands on employers for flexibility, working from home options, special leave days, all sorts of nuances that have caused organisations to rethink how flexible they are, how their HR systems work, how they collaborate with each other, extent to which their technology is in place. So this tsunami of mental health things has had this sort of ripple effect in policy, procedure, systems, processes. We haven't worked it out yet. We've got a way to go in terms of us getting that right. The question will be, what happens when the unemployment rate goes up and the pendulum of the balance of power starts to swing back in favour of the employer? Will those things disappear, or will they survive that pendulum swing? That will be an interesting thing for us to watch.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Thank you for getting into a deep dive in that. Would I be correct to summarize to say that this is one thing that the leaders are also missing about the COVID disruption? They're not giving enough attention. Would you think so?
I, I, I think there's lots of attention on it, so I don't think people have missed it. I think we're still struggling with how we're going to respond.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
It's
think we're
more
all seeing it there.
struggling with it. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we all have partners, colleagues, neighbours who are struggling with mental health challenges. So it's everywhere. We can't miss it. What we do about it, that's where we're struggling, I think.
Mm. I was going to suggest, or not suggest, well, I was going to say that I'm wondering when you said about the swing of the pendulum, right? And that kind of was where my thinking was going. What is mental health issues and the discussions that we're having around it going to go down the route of how it's just a mere ticking of boxes for some organizations, like many activities around CSR has become DEI, things that are hip and happening, and these are the things that people want to hear about that organizations are doing because it's part of your attraction, strategy,
Yeah.
right? So is it going to go that way after some time, and it's going to be something that it's just we talk about it, but we do activities that actually have no connection or very little connection. It has that nice packaging, but
Yeah.
there's no substance and meat and thinking behind it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the change, right? You change for the sake of changing.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think there'll be a continuum of that. I think some organisations will tick the box and do it for compliance reasons.
Mm,
Other people will do the nice morning tea and call
mm.
it a wellness activity.
Yep.
Others, though, I think are taking it seriously and are trying to get an evidence base for that assessment of the well-being of their staff.
Mm,
I saw some material just recently on a measurement of psychological safety in teams.
mm.
And so a very short, sharp survey that can be done many, many times in the course of a year because it's contextual, and measure the perception of psychological safety in this team. So I think some organisations are getting quite sophisticated about that.
Yeah. Yep.
There'll always be the ones at the other end that tick the box and have the nice muffins for morning tea.
Yep. And it's coincidental because I just also heard about a survey on psychological safety as well. I mean, in Malaysia. So there we
Yes.
go. Can I take over? I want to just take on that thinking around change, right? So some COVID pushed us in terms of there's no way we could have thought of that scenario called COVID, right?
Yes. Yes.
And yet at the same time, scenario planning has been around for ages. I mean,
Yep.
senior leaders look at it because you got to scan the horizon and see that, right?
Yes. Yes.
Then you've got the third permutation where, in some instances, it's almost as if COVID did not happen at all. People kind of like wiped it up, gone, erased,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Read the button, we are back down. It's almost as if, that 2-3 years, 2.5 years did not happen. And we are just about where we were in 2020, right?
Yes.
So from a leadership perspective, with so much noise happening, so much that you have to deal with on the ground, things that that are rapidly changing, because there are things, as you said, that are rapidly changing. There are things that don't change or change very, very slowly.
Yes.
How do leaders need? What? Oh my God, it's overwhelming for leaders, right? What? How do they scan? How do they make sense of it? Where does the sense making, or how does the sense making come up for them?
Maybe I can answer that question by telling you a slightly silly story. My youngest daughter wanted to learn to drive, and so my wife and I drew straws to see which one of us would take my daughter for driving lessons, and I lost. I lost that. So I took my daughter out for a few driving lessons, and it became very clear very quickly that if I was to have any sort of long-term relationship with my daughter, I needed to outsource this activity.
Okay.
So we hired a local driving school to take my daughter for driving lessons. So this lady called Kay would come into our driveway, pick up my daughter. She would take her out driving for an hour, come back in and park the car. My daughter would come inside and Kay would get out of the car and have a cigarette because she needed to recover from this hour-long experience with my daughter.
Okay.
Feeling sorry for Kay, one day I went out and asked her what I thought at the time was a pretty innocuous question. I said, Kay, is there a single characteristic that distinguishes the novice driver from the experienced driver? And to my great surprise, she immediately said yes. There is a single characteristic that distinguishes the novice driver from the experienced driver. And that characteristic is how far they look down the road. So when my daughter was driving, she was kind of inside the car, steering wheel, brakes, and maybe 5 or 10 meters in front of the car. That's where she was looking. When the three of us drive our cars, we're looking 100, 200, 300 meters down the road. And we notice the small child playing on the side of the road. We notice the rain clouds in the distance. We notice the little shortcut that might save us a bit of time. And we don't necessarily respond to all of those things, but we are alert to them because we lift our eyes, we lift our vision a bit higher. For me, that's a great analogy for leadership and for what would be described as the environmental scan, if you like. If you're constantly looking down at your desk or in your workplace like this, you're going to miss all those signals and you're going to miss threats and you're going to miss opportunities if you're doing this all the time. So the skill of us as drivers, as mature and experienced drivers, is that we lift our vision a bit higher, lift our heads up, and we look around. Now, in a work sense, that is about paying attention and keeping an eye on things. And you might have a whole variety of different sources of places where you might scan. It might be forums like this one where you might hear something new or hear a few trends that come from a podcast like this one. It might be a trusted network that you have. It might be some journals that you enjoy reading. It could be talking to other more senior people in the organization. So it's taking every opportunity you possibly can just to lift your head up and look around at that environment. I can't guarantee you'll spot the next COVID, but you'll spot a lot of things, a lot more things than if you've got your head down looking at your desk all day, every day, week in, week out.
Wow. Thank you very much for that, Dr. Shaun. I love that analogy. And with your permission, I probably use it too. But
Sure.
I'll say I got it from Dr. Shaun.
Yeah, no. Talk about your next door neighbor's daughter.
Okay, that's fine. No, I totally, I see that, it's very clear. Yes, when experienced drivers, they have a 360 view in that sense, or at least 180 view, right?
Yeah.
Of the surrounding, and they're looking ahead and looking to the sides, they're paying attention,
Yes.
possibly looking for the safety issues along the way, they call it under safety driving, I hear that, and I think it is very important in organization for leaders to actually do this. And you've given some suggestions. I've got a challenge here. This year, from what I've been speaking to a lot of leaders and business owners, the challenge has been on the P&L.
Yes.
Right? It's short term. I need to fix my problems today. I can't think about tomorrow itself.
Yeah.
Right? And
Yep.
I agree with you. If you're just going to be looking at short term, you are going to miss something down the road.
Yes.
So how do you suggest from a structural point of view, an organization can put in place avenues for leaders to, while focusing on short term, still look at the long term? What do you suggest?
It's a really interesting question. One famous Harvard Business School professor, Michael Tushman, talks about ambidextrous leadership. And this is about saying managing for today whilst planning for tomorrow. And so it's this thing about we have to learn to do both. We have to be sufficiently agile and adept and ambidextrous to be able to go, I need to run my business today. I need to meet my P&L targets. I absolutely need to do that. And I need to look into the future and think through the changes and do the scans and assess what's happening in the marketplace. There's no shortcut for this one. Now, I think leaders can provide some space for their staff to do these things. Give them permission to stop and think great thoughts. Give them permission to not be constantly, head down doing work. That will help. But there's no shortcuts here, unfortunately, because every time you lift your head up and lift your eyes up, the P&L's not happening, and vice versa. But I don't think there's a magic answer there.
I get that. Shaun, let me just ask one more question first. I hear you totally, Dr. Shaun, and I'm also been struggling with this because I've asked the question: can leaders not look at a distance and just focus on today? And I'm coming to the conclusion: no, you have to look. And you banged it home and said, okay, you got to be an ambidextrous leader.
Yes.
Now you kept emphasizing you have to. Now this is where my concern is, because early on you said a lot of people do not want to become leaders.
Yes.
And now they have to do this.
Yeah.
How do we now challenge the assumptions about leadership and reframe it for leaders to see their role differently with these challenges?
The way I might respond to that, I'll use another car analogy here, that whenever we drive
F1,
a car, right? Well, maybe an F1. But when we drive a car, we never, ever, ever drive in a straight line, ever. We're always doing this. We're always making a whole series of micro adjustments as we go down the road. We don't hold the steering wheel like this rigidly and keep it perfectly still, because if we do that, we'll bump into things. We'll crash into a curb or we're always doing lots and lots of micro adjustments. And from a leadership perspective, I kind of like that analogy as well, because it's around the ability to be agile. I need to be light on my feet here. I want to be able to make small adjustments frequently rather than big adjustments later. So if I can do this ambidextrous leadership thing, I'll be able to make all those micro adjustments, and I won't get whacked because I didn't see something coming down the pipeline. And for me, that's a much more reassuring way of thinking about my role as a leader, with a bit more confidence that I'm actually going to be heading in the right direction and making these small adjustments every single day, rather than a big one because I didn't see something coming. That's the way I think about it, at least.
No, thank you very much. Thank you. Shaun will ask the next question, but I really wanted to say thank you. That's a beautiful example with the cars. Look forward and make the micro adjustments.
Yeah.
Thank you. Shaun.
It's along the same line. I was going to connect to what our guest last week, Viju Menon, talked about. And Malhar and I had an opportunity to meet him yesterday in Kuala Lumpur. We just happened to be all in the city at the same time. And he said, how he asked a very interesting question, and we didn't have the answer, right? So on one hand, you said the small adjustments, and the small adjustments come from what you shared during our pre-show. You said leaders need time to incubate. They need
Mm.
time for discernment. They
Yes.
need time to mull and think, and maybe even connect the dots, right? Of
Yes. Yes.
separate points that are coming in, data points that are coming in, right? So they need that, and at the same time, there's this wanting leaders to fill that pipeline, right?
Yes.
Or
Yes.
being able to, in an industry where there's no shortage of talent,
Mhm.
how do we develop in a different way? In Viju's case, is in tech, right? And there's no shortage of talent from his perspective.
Mhm.
Yet developing leaders, right? How do we get potential leaders to seek improvement, or seek that, I'm doing this not because of the better pay. I'm not doing this because of the prestige. Yes, that may be ticking in the earlier part of our careers, but
Yep.
seeking and for personal meaning, personal
Yep.
value.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So he was grappling with that, right? And I said, okay, let me bring it up and just tap on Sean's.
That's not fair, asking me to solve that wicked
No, no,
problem.
no.
Um,
I'm not asking. I'm asking you for your opinion.
no,
Uh,
I mean, I think the role model that leaders display is important
mm,
here.
mm,
Um, if I, as a leader, are driven by my financial rewards, driven by my bonus, behave exclusively for that personal gain, then I am going to send a very clear signal to the people that report to me that that is what I value and that is what I
mm,
see as important. If, however, I am a ferocious learner, a really good listener, somebody who seeks to help other people achieve their outcomes,
mm,
perhaps even before I achieve mine, that's going to send a very different signal to the people that report to me. And they can make that choice then. If they say, I don't like that style that Shaun is using, and it's not for me, then that's okay. But if we want people to behave in a particular way, most people behave the way they behave because we've taught them to behave that way.
mm,
And organizations have a particular style and a particular way of doing things, and we've often taught people to behave that way because of some deliberate incentivizing or some accidental incentivizing where there's unintended consequences for particular behaviors.
mm. I
Um,
think it's the right time for me to ask this question. What's your personal philosophy about leadership, Sean?
for me, I always come back to this notion of leaders should care about their staff, about the
Mm,
team of people that report to them. If you don't care about them, do something else. Find another
mm,
role. Lots of other, and that's not necessarily a judgment. It's about, there are lots of people in very technical roles who can be fantastic individual contributors to an organization. But a leadership role is much, much easier if you care about the people that report to you and they will see that you care about them.
mm,
That makes life much, much easier. And going back to the start of the conversation, many of those difficult conversations become much more fluid if that relationship is established. I think there's some things about clarity of expectations.
mm,
And the third thing would be around, a bit like the driving example, um, nudging performance improvement rather than shoving performance improvement. So, rather than the annual performance review or the 6-monthly performance review, maybe the daily nudge is a much better way of bringing about performance improvement. So for me, those things, it's the caring, it's the clarity of the performance expectations, it's the nudging performance improvement, and then get out of the way. Get out of the way. People are incredibly talented and incredibly capable. Most chief executives that I've met have not been extraordinary intellects or extraordinary in other ways. They've been very capable, but a lot of very capable people in other more junior roles as well. So clear expectations, let them know they're supported, guide them, coach them by all means, and then get out of their way. They'll star for you and they'll do a fantastic job.
Such wise words. Really, you brought heart into leadership. Yeah, and you almost make it sound easy, Shaun. I know it's not.
I have failed if that's the case. Yeah, at one level it's naive. It's this idea of can you drive performance and be a nice person at the same time? There's lots of book titles around that. Can you be a nice person and drive performance? It's hard, no question about that. Everything's easier if you have a good relationship with your team, though. Everything is easier if you have a good relationship. The performance appraisal, the changing of portfolios, the agility that's required with COVID, all of those things were much easier for leaders who had good relationships with their team. If you've got a bad relationship with one of your team members, then all of those things are going to be much, much harder. So as a starting point, maybe that relationship is worth the effort.
Over to you, Ashok.
Yeah, so I'm constantly hearing the importance of relationships, and I cannot run away from it. I totally believe that is extremely, extremely important. And I love your leadership philosophy about caring for people, because it starts from there. It's about caring for people. It's about wanting to build that sincere relationship in that sense.
Yes.
And I know you may not have firm statistics around this, but if you have to say all the leaders that you've seen, what percentage of leaders actually care for people sincerely? Where would you put that in the percentage?
Wow. Okay.
Because there's a follow-up question from here. There's going to be a follow-up question from here.
That's a really, really hard question.
Yeah.
Like I said, I know it's just.
I'm going to say most people in those roles. I'm an eternal optimist. I'm a glass half full kind of person. So I believe that most people do most things for good intentions. Some people in the world are positively evil, but fortunately there's very few of them.
Yes.
The rest of us are well-meaning people trying to do the right thing by ourselves and by each other and by our families and our connections and our colleagues and so on. So I'm going to go with most and stick with my positive frame.
Nice. No, I like that. I like that because I agree with you. I share the same philosophy with you in the sense of I believe everybody is good and everybody wants to do good.
Yeah.
I think you hear a but coming. What I feel is it's people's fears that holds them from being the best version and therefore impacting others.
Yes.
And sometimes I feel that in an organization, they put in too much of rigor and structures that creates a deeper fear.
Yes.
And I believe that if we do see some of these assumptions being changed,
Yes.
right, we might be able to have more goodness of people coming up.
Yes.
So the link to that, the question I have for you is, you have your personal philosophy. What would you like to see change about leadership styles if you had a magic wand, right? And if you could
Yes.
change the whatever is taught in MBAs and organizational structure, today you have got the magic wand to make that change. What would you like to change about leadership styles? And let's look at the year 2030, right? By
Okay.
then, what would you like to
Okay.
see change?
I'd like to see women rule the world.
Yes, me too.
I would. So that's the first thing. This is coming from a man who has 2 daughters and 3 granddaughters. So I'd like to see women rule the world. I'd also like to see a resurgence or re-emergence of the thoughtful leader. We've had a period of, and it's relatively recent, of the extroverted or the default to extroversion in leadership. The person that's loud and charismatic and domineering is a relatively recent phenomenon. My understanding, it was, it kind of came out of the swing towards the more sort of North American style of leadership in the 1950s and 60s. Before that time, the extroverted leader was seen as a bit of a show-off, a bit brash and a bit, a show-off, and so they were frowned upon. So this extroverted leadership default is a relatively recent phenomenon. I'd love to see that pendulum swing back to a more thoughtful leadership model that accommodated more introverted leaders and
or quiet leaders.
Quiet leaders, yes, absolutely. Yeah. That, the Susan Cain's book "Quiet" is a fabulous book to read around that notion that if we were a bit more considered, a bit more thoughtful, that would be a wonderful outcome, I think, from a leadership perspective, not only in an organizational sense, but perhaps in a political and a nation-building perspective as well.
Nice.
Wow. I totally agree with you, especially on the first point about women must rule the world. Again, that's probably because of my cultural linkage. I come from a matriarchal kind of society. If I go back to history, right?
Yes.
And I still believe women will bring major power to this world.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And I like the fact that you mentioned it's probably a good time for a resurgence of quiet leaders or thoughtful leaders.
Yes.
And I am slanting to agree totally with you, because that's what we have seen in our show, Leadership in Flow Asia, since last year that we've come on. We just did this show, but what we started seeing is the strong, impactful leaders are the ones who are very introspective.
Yes.
They're very thoughtful, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're always about, can I not only develop myself, but can I also develop the next person? And they're also keeping the eye forward on the growth trajectories.
Yes.
We're seeing a combination, of that.
Yes. Yeah.
Well,
I hope you're right. I really hope you're right, because I think, I think a more even spread of those leadership styles would help us in lots of really positive ways, in my view.
Yep.
Wow.
And I echo that thought about not just from an organizational perspective, but from a societal perspective, and also from a global perspective. I think I think we need to anchor back down to what makes us human, and what essentially makes us a society, a community, and what keeps us together, either at organizational level or broader levels. So thank you for putting that all so nicely together as the last question for your show, for the show this week. Before we end the show, is there anything that you'd like to share with us? I've got one more question, but I'll leave that until after you. Anything that you'd like to share with us? Last words.
No. I am a shoe shine boy with dirty shoes. I am constantly learning this myself, and opportunities like this are great to have the opportunity to share that. So nothing more to add for me.
Thank you, Shaun. My last question is a bit of a rapid fire question. What's the best leadership book, your favorite leadership book that you have read?
There's lots. So one I read recently, which I really enjoyed, is a book called Think Again by Adam Grant, an American author. Really interesting book that forces us to think about the styles of leadership and decision making in leadership. So Think Again by Adam Grant is really well worthwhile reading.
Okay. And would that be the same book that you would say leaders should pick up next? Or is there another book that you would recommend for leaders who are seeking?
It's certainly a book that anybody could read. It's not exclusively for an experienced leader or anything. I'm a great fan of the work that Barry Posner and James Coos have done, the Leadership Challenge. Again, for anybody, but especially if somebody's relatively new to the leadership space, then the Coos and Posner work is always worth reading.
All right. Thank you for that. And we have reached 1 hour mark.
Yes, we have. All right. Thanks, Dr.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shaun,
Thank you for having me.
Emphasizing the importance of whatever the change is, focus on the importance of relationship, because relationship matters, and pay a lot of attention to that. Challenge the assumptions to ensure you keep doing that. Thank you very much, Dr. Shaun.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And we release you to go back to your
granddaughters,
to your wife, your 2 daughters, and your 3 grandchildren, and have a great evening, and catch those F1 shows that Ashok has been mentioning to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity. Bye for now.
Bye. Okay, so that brings us to the end of week 2.
Week 2 of July.
Yeah, for July, and 2 distinct themes on the idea of resolute leaders, right? Leaders who persevere, leaders who look at things differently, right? Regardless of what the situation is, scanning the horizons, holding on to certain beliefs, yet at the same time challenging assumptions as they go along, right? It was a great exchange of ideas. I was really intrigued by how Shaun looks at leadership, and how how his focus is on so much on relationships. It's been very congruent with that.
Yes.
Yeah. You want to share about what's happening on the 10th of August?
Okay, so 10th of August, we are having our inaugural Leadership Learning Festival in KL. Yeah, we are kicking it off in KL, and the location is which university?
UNITA,
right?
Yeah.
It's going to be on the 10th of August. It's on a Thursday. It's going to start off at 8:30. We're going to have a half-day session where there's going to be keynote speakers. We're going to have panel discussions. We're going to have interactive games. And it's a whole learning about leadership and quiet leaders, I must say. Right?
Yep.
So we'll send up the details, and we would love to see you on the 10th of August in KL.
Yes.
For our leadership.
Yep. And some of our guests
festival.
From the show from last year, as well as up to this year to current, have said yes, and they'll be there as well as
Fantastic.
part of the audience. So it's going to be a really good one. Hit us up for the details. We'll send you the registration link. It is complimentary. We have a whole event sponsored, so it'll be good to have you here. Have you there? And if not, we'll see you next week, same time, same place, with a new guest. Bye, everyone.
Right. Bye, everyone.